Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that you'll make your words Olivia's words today. I pray that you'll be able to make all of us walk out of here with a new lesson again. We've been so blessed to be able to go through this week with such amazing talks, and I know that you'll make this one another amazing one. I pray that you'll calm all of her nerves and just be able to just make all of those words just flow out of her mouth. I pray that you'll make it very easy for her to be able just to speak all of your words to all of us, Lord. And I pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Hello. Okay. Um, my name is Olivia Rayner, and today I'm going to start by asking you guys some questions. So, how many of you guys went through quarantine last year? Okay. And how many of you guys enjoyed it at first? What what about towards the end? Wow, there were a lot of you. Well, last year lockdown started for us in early March, and at first I thought, no way is this going to be longer than a week. And then I was like, okay, well, it's a little longer now, but no more than a month. It was almost 12 months later when it finally ended for us, almost a year. And I'm not sure what lockdowns looked like for you guys, but for us, it meant not seeing any friends, not going out to eat, not going out to go shopping or anything. And we actually had groceries delivered to us through like Amazon Prime, so we were just completely isolated. And the weirdest part about it wasn't actually being in quarantine, but it was when we came back to normal life again. Um, and it got me thinking how quickly life can change, either from going into quarantine or coming out of it. But the truth is, you don't have to go through 11 months of isolation to know hardship. We all go through tough times at one point or another, and today I'll be telling you a few stories of hardship and faith, and I hope you can find encouragement. Okay, so the first story I'll be telling you is about David, and we frequently think of him as either someone who became king of Israel or who slew the giant Goliath, but we don't talk about his exile as much. So the story I'm going to be telling you today can be found in Samuel 21 to 24, when King Saul, the leader of Israel, became jealous of David's popularity, and instead of like smack talking him or something, he decided he'd kill him. So after several murder attempts, David finally escaped, and he decided to go for help in a dubious place. Um, oh yes, okay, there we go. So he went to the king of Gath, and the king of Gath was king of the Philistines, and the Philistines were the sworn enemies of Israel. So he went there hoping for refuge, but when they saw him, they began to say, "Is this David? Isn't he the one they sing about in their songs? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." And it was true. David had killed thousands of them, if not 10,000s. They were his enemies. They had fallen under his sword in the many battles he'd led. So suddenly things had gone from, I'm fleeing my home and I've lost everything, to I'm in my enemy's home and they want to kill me. What would you do in a situation like that? Well, David did what he could. He began to scratch marks on doors and drooled all over himself and began to scream. And when King Achor saw him, David's act was so convincing, he said to his advisors, "Look at that man. He is insane. Why must you bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here? Must he come into my house?" So they left David, and David went into the wilderness. And this land is not like anything we're used to. I've been to the parts of the Middle East, and it's just truly desolate. There's sand as far as the eye can see. It kicks up, it gets in your eyes. It's just like nothing grows there. They say that there's forests, but there's just like a few shrubs on the hills. And so David was in this place thousands of years ago. And for them, this was psychological hell, because he'd gone from this beloved prince of world power to this ragged outlaw who went to his enemies for help. And sometimes we feel so isolated that we also go to our enemies for help, and they might not even be people. Reflecting on his situation, David cried out, I lift my voice to the Lord for mercy. Um, is it you who watches over my way? People have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. And in his pain, he asked God for help, and God comforted him. And as time went on, things actually started to pick up for him. People came to him. They were his family, his cousins, people in debt, people who had grievances or hated Saul. And David became their commander, and his band grew to over 400 people. And David's band wandered in the desert. Now, there was other stories that happened in between, but they came to this one part of the desert, and there was this city called Keilah. And Keilah was being besieged by the Philistines, and the Philistines were planning on killing them and taking over the city. And David prayed to God and asked, should I go and attack the Philistines? And God answered, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. Now, when David told his band, they weren't so thrilled about this. They said, here in Judah, we are afraid. How much more so if we go against the Philistine army? So David prayed to God again, and God said, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David went down to Keilah and fought the Philistines and won. Now, Saul had heard that David was in Keilah, and he had quite a different take on things. He said, God has delivered David to me. David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars. And this twisted decision led him first to proclaim it in court and then gather his army to go against Keilah to capture David. And so David heard about this, and he prayed to God and asked, will the king of Keilah surrender me? And God replied, he will. So David, still in doubt, asked again, will the king of Keilah surrender me? And God answered, he will. So David and his band once again fled back into the wilderness. And by now they'd grown in number to over 600. Their women and children, and their constant moving and fleeing was becoming unsustainable. Now, David and his people went to these strongholds, old strongholds, in this land called Ziph. And the people there really didn't like David. They lived in a place that was once livid with jewels and gardens, and it had been the old Edomite border, which had been there since the flood, and it was old and staunch as time itself. So these people went up to Saul and said, David is hiding among the strongholds at Horish on the hill of Keilah. Now, your majesty, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be personally responsible for giving him to you. And Saul, very glad, said, the Lord bless you for your concern for me. Go and get more information. Find out all the places where David hides and who has seen him there. They tell me he is very crafty. Find out all the places and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the area, I will track him down among all the clans of Judah. So the Ziphites went back to their country ahead of Saul and began to spy. And then Saul came to capture David. And David started fleeing, and he went up kind of to this mountain area where there's hills and whatnot. And he was going up one side, and Saul came up the other side, and Saul surrounded him, so he couldn't fight them, and he couldn't escape. And just his situation looked desperate. It looked like Saul was just going to kill him, and that would be the end of the story. But he prayed to God, and Saul was almost like he could almost feel his victory. But this messenger came to him at the last moment and said, come quickly, Saul, the Philistines are raiding the land. So Saul was forced to leave and had to rush to meet their good old buddies, the Philistines. God never abandons his people in their time of crisis. And this next story I'm about to tell you is about someone who lived through incredible hardship but was able to tell their story. Now, if you've ever thought there's no way out, this is a story of a man who went through prison camp in one of the harshest places in the world. We don't know his real name because of privacy reasons, so we're going to call him Mr. Wong. his last name. And he was a police officer that stood on the brink of a collapsing world. After the communist takeover in 1949, foreign missionaries were thrown out of China. Gangsters, government workers, and military staff and Chinese Christians could not leave the country, so the Chinese government persecuted them. When they found out Mr. Wong was a Christian, he was sent to a hard labor camp in Qinghai, Tibet, where he fought to survive for the next 20 years. Now, in this prison camp, he tried to share his faith multiple times, but many of his fellow prisoners often turned him in for rewards. Mr. Wong was almost killed by soldiers, disease, injuries, and torture, but his remarkable story of survival earned him the nickname the man who could not be killed, and his amazing story continues to touch thousands of people. So, picture this. It's the year 1961, and it's a bitter midwinter's day. Sheer wind is burning through windows and tents, and these paper-thin prisoners are struggling to stay warm. It's just so cold. And on that day, Mr. Wong was in a prison hospital working when this jailer came out and called him. And at first he thought, okay, they're asking me to leave to work, or maybe I'm even going to be released. But as soon as he stepped outside, he learned the real reason. There was this other prisoner named Lehman Kai, and previously Wong had written down scripture for this person, but since then, Lehman Kai had turned him in for a reward. The jailer commanded Lee to bind Wong, and then this prisoner asked if he could beat Wong up. So after brutally beating him, Lehman Kai said, "Other people have tried to tie criminal Wong, but he could still move. If I bind somebody, he cannot move unless I release him. I have a special knot. No one can untie it but me. I call it my Lehman Kai knot. Let me bind criminal Wong with it. I promise you will not be disappointed." So the jailer agreed, and after Lehman Kai did that, he said, "What should we do with prisoner Wong now?" And Lee said, "Let's take him into the cold and tie him to a post." So Lehman Kai and several other prisoners dragged Wong through the snow, because he was by now completely immobilized. He had ropes binding his hands and feet. And after tying him to the said post, Lee scoffed, "Not only will you have my Lehman Kai knot to bind you, but the Liberation Army will watch you all night. You must remain motionless. If you so much as move a muscle, a soldier will shoot you immediately." However, only one soldier remained that night. Why was there only one soldier? Because the temperature had dropped negative 38 Celsius. It was so cold that your breath crackled and froze to your skin before you finished exhaling. And that night, dangerously strong wind churned up the world into boiling clouds of ice. It became so unbearable that this one remaining guard staggered away, leaving Wong for dead. The guard could endure it no longer, and he knew that no one, especially an immobilized prisoner, could survive such a night. Why should he die too? So Wong felt his numb hands crackle and flinch, and he knew that he was getting the beginning signs of hypothermia. And he prayed to God, "Jesus, my friend, I know you're the real God. I know that you're crucified for me so that I could be saved. I'm willing to die for you if that's your will, but I don't think now is the right time." And suddenly he felt a presence behind him, and these knots which had bound him started to slip off, and he got up and paced around the post and exercised to stay warm. And although now he was staying alive, he was also praying that the guards would not see him and shoot him. When finally morning broke through this terrible night, Wong sat down back against the pole, and he tried to put his hands and feet back into the ropes, because he knew that if they found him untied, they would accuse someone else of helping him and torture that supposed helper. So Wong prayed again, "Lord, you sent my guardian angel to untie me. Please send him to tie me back up again." And Wong felt the ropes tighten over his hands like they'd never fallen off. Now, moments later, the guard who had guarded him the night before approached, and he stopped in his tracks when he saw Wong. "You're alive?" he asked. "This is impossible. You're supposed to be frozen to death." And he felt Wong's hands. "They're warm? Your hands are supposed to be blocks of ice." The guard walked with Wong to the prison campfire, where other guards watched in disbelief as he approached, as if seeing a ghost. Now, this is one of many miracle stories that Wong went through in his time at camp. But one of my favorite passages from the story is when he is finally freed. And on that day, he's approached by a different guard, and the guy goes, "You are a very lucky man, Criminal Wong. You came to Shanghai with 1,500 other prisoners, and over 25 years, 3,500 prisoners also came from Shanghai. Today, 18 of those 5,000 are left, and only 5 of them were chosen for release. You are one of those 5. Each of them requested travel papers to visit their families, and all were denied a holiday except for you. I don't know how you are so lucky. Maybe your God was with you." Okay, now I'm going to change gears. What I mentioned earlier was that I went through 11 months of isolation, but I did not tell you the effect it had on me. Like David, I didn't go to God for help when things got hard. I tried to find refuge elsewhere, and this took form as writing stories. I wrote stories as a way of escape. And out of curiosity, I checked the page count for last year, all these stories I'd done. And it came up to over 360 pages. But it didn't do a lot to help me or bring me peace. And I was just as miserable as before. And not until recently did I really understand why I immersed myself so fully into it. David and Mr. Wong's stories are both encouraging because it's about people who went through a lot of hardship, stress, and uncertainty, but they weren't taken down and their faith didn't sink. David went to the Philistines as an escape, and I went to my writing. And the truth is, we all turn to other things at some point as a substitute for God. But, when has it really been beneficial? Has it freed you? Do you feel filled, like the emptiness inside of you is gone? Mr. Wong was tied to a pole, and he couldn't physically escape. When he turned to God, God freed him. Same with David. When David was cornered and the world seemed like it was being ripped apart, he turned to God, and God caused Saul to go away. Our sad reality is that all of us often try to escape in the wrong way like David. But God promises he will be with us through hardship no matter what. And I'm not saying stay in a bad situation. There are times in our lives when we really do have to flee. I'm just saying that trying to find refuge outside of God will not bring you peace. So although David escaped Saul and I left America, Mr. Wong was still in prison camp 10 years after the story I told you. Sometimes escape is not physical. Mr. Wong was imprisoned for 20 years in a place that was designed to break the human spirit, but he was not broken. When Mr. Wong asked God for help, God was there for him, and although he was not physically freed from his situation, God was there for him emotionally. Whatever you are going through, please ask God for help. Ask him into your hearts, and he will heal you. I close my talk today with a Bible verse, and it can be found in Revelation 21. It goes, "God will wipe the tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the things of old have passed away," when we go to heaven. Thank you all for listening.